Imagine this, it's the year 2500 BCE. You're strolling through a bustling city. The streets are neatly laid out, almost like someone had drawn them with a ruler. The drains are so clean you might actually feel guilty dropping a leaf in them. There are public baths that would make even a modern spa look like a budget motel. And the air smells faintly of baked clay, freshly tilled fields, and, well, cows. Lots of cows. Now, you might assume I'm describing some futuristic utopia, but in fact, this was daily life in one of the world's very first urban civilizations, the Indus Valley Civilization. A place so ancient, it existed long before pyramids were fashionable, before Greek philosophers were asking too many questions, and even before the Chinese began brewing tea. We tend to remember certain civilizations because they left behind noisy monuments, giant pyramids, dramatic stone temples, or endless written records of who conquered whom. The Indus Valley people, on the other hand, were quieter. They didn't build massive statues of kings pointing proudly toward the horizon. They didn't carve long-winded inscriptions bragging about battles. Instead, they focused on the practical, well-planned cities, efficient drainage, comfortable homes, and lively markets. In short, they were less about, look how great I am, and more about, look how nice this city smells after rain. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization, thrived along the fertile plains of the Indus River and its tributaries, stretching across what is today Pakistan, northwest India, and parts of Afghanistan. Picture a region the size of Western Europe, dotted with cities and villages connected by trade and culture. The timeline, roughly 3300 BCE to 1300 BCE, with its golden peak between 2600 and 1900 BCE. That's nearly 2 millennia of urban life, long enough for countless generations to be born, grow up, farm wheat, trade beads, take a bath, and pass away, all before most of the civilizations we usually talk about had even figured out city planning. Now here, where it gets fascinating. When British archaeologists first stumbled upon the ruins of Harappa in the 19th century, they thought they'd simply found an old town. But as they dug deeper, they realized they weren't looking at just another ruin. They were standing on the remains of a civilization that had existed quietly in the shadows of history, one that rivaled Mesopotamia and Egypt in scale and sophistication. And yet, despite all this, we still know shockingly little about them. Why? Because the Harappans had a written script that no one, absolutely no one, has managed to read. They left us thousands of tiny inscriptions, mostly carved on seals about 4 or 5 symbols long. It could be poetry, it could be tax receipts, it could just say property of Ramesh, do not steal. We simply don't know. Imagine trying to understand Shakespeare by only looking at the title pages. Frustrating, isn't it? To better appreciate how remarkable the Indus Valley Civilization was, let's pause and look around at the rest of the world during this time. In Egypt, pharaohs were busy stacking limestone blocks into pyramids so future tourists could marvel and complain about the heat. In Mesopotamia, people were inventing cuneiform and scribbling down who owed them goats. Meanwhile, in the Indus Valley, folks were taking long baths in brick-lined pools, organizing their cities into neat grids, and trading cotton textiles. Yes, cotton, the same fabric you're probably wearing right now. The Harappans were among the very first people in the world to domesticate cotton. Imagine that. 4,000 years ago, someone in Mohenjo-Daro was spinning thread while chatting with their neighbor about the weather. Fast forward to today, and you might be wearing a t-shirt thanks to their early textile experiments. So, in a small way, your wardrobe owes a debt to this forgotten civilization. Now here's the curious part. For a civilization this advanced, they seemed almost allergic to showing off. Unlike the Egyptians or Mesopotamians, the Indus people didn't leave behind dramatic palaces or towering ziggurats. No giant statues of leaders glaring at you. No endless hieroglyphics singing the praises of some divine ruler. Instead, their cities suggest a society that valued equality, cleanliness, and community living. Their houses, for example, were surprisingly similar in size. Sure, some were bigger than others, but there wasn't the massive gulf between palace and mud hut that you see elsewhere. This has led historians to suspect that the Harappans might have lived in a relatively egalitarian society, where wealth and power weren't concentrated in the hands of one flashy king. Of course, someone was probably in charge. It's hard to imagine thousands of people just magically agreeing on where to put the drains. But whoever they were, they didn't feel the need to immortalize themselves in stone. And honestly, that feels kind of refreshing. History is full of leaders shouting their own names into eternity. The Indus Valley Civilization whispers instead. But perhaps what makes the Indus Valley so endlessly fascinating is how much remains a mystery. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know the names of their kings, or even if they had kings. We don't know why their cities eventually declined and were abandoned. What we do know comes from the bricks, beads, pottery, and ruins they left behind. It's like trying to reconstruct an entire novel after finding only the bookmarks. And yet, even with this limited evidence, what we can piece together paints a vivid picture. One of the world's earliest, cleanest, and most mysteriously quiet civilizations. So settle in. Over the next sections, we'll walk through their cities, peek into their homes, watch them trade across oceans, and ponder their unexplained disappearance. We'll do it slowly, like wandering through the ancient streets themselves, taking in each brick, each artifact, and each unanswered question. Because the Indus Valley Civilization may have vanished thousands of years ago, but its story still lingers, patient, waiting for us to listen. If you've ever been lost in a modern city, say, circling the same confusing block while your phone GPS insists you've arrived at your destination, you might appreciate the refreshing logic of Indus Valley urban planning. Their cities weren't accidents of growth, like so many medieval towns where streets twist and curl as if designed by a drunken goat. No, the Harappans built cities as if they had a city planner with a very sharp ruler and a very strong sense of order. Take Mohenjo-Daro, perhaps the most famous of their cities. If you could float above it, you'd see a carefully laid out grid, broad streets intersecting at right angles, neighborhoods carved neatly into blocks, and smaller side lanes branching off. In many ways, it looked more like a 20th century American suburb than a 4,000-year-old settlement, except, of course, with fewer cul-de-sacs and more cows. The building material of choice: standardized baked bricks, not the random-sized mud lumps you might expect from ancient construction, but bricks that were so uniform you could stack them like Lego. Imagine the level of coordination it took. Every city across hundreds of miles using the same size bricks, like they'd all agreed on a cosmic building code. A Harappan from Harappa could, in theory, borrow a few bricks from a cousin in Lothal, and they'd fit perfectly. These bricks built everything: houses, wells, drainage systems, city walls. If the Indus Valley had a national slogan, it could have been, "In bricks we trust." Each major city, like Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, had two main parts: the citadel and the lower town. Now, citadel might conjure up images of kings lounging in palaces or soldiers sharpening swords, but the Harappan citadel was different. It wasn't just about defense. It was more like the community's multi-purpose hub. One of the most striking features here was the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro. Picture a massive, rectangular pool lined with bricks, with steps leading gracefully down into the water. Some scholars believe it was used for ritual bathing, others for social gatherings. Personally, I like to imagine it was the ancient equivalent of a community swimming pool, minus the lifeguards yelling, "No running." The fact that they built such a structure at all says a lot. It tells us they valued cleanliness, ritual, or at the very least, a good soak. And the engineering behind it, waterproof brick lining, drains to empty it, shows an advanced understanding of hydraulics. These weren't people throwing buckets of water on each other for fun. They knew how to design and maintain serious infrastructure. Speaking of infrastructure, let's pause to admire their drainage systems. It might sound boring. Who wants to talk about drains? But trust me, these were world class. Every house in Mohenjo-Daro seems to have been connected to a covered drainage system that ran along the main streets. Wastewater flowed out neatly, covered by stone slabs so you didn't have to watch it trickle by as you went shopping. This was 4,000 years ago. Meanwhile, in some modern cities today, we're still struggling with potholes and open sewers. Somewhere out there, a Harappan plumber is laughing quietly at us. The houses themselves were sturdy, usually 2 stories high, built with those ever-faithful bricks. Most had flat roofs and inner courtyards. Some even had private wells. Imagine the luxury of drawing water without walking to a communal source, something that wouldn't become common again in many parts of the world for thousands of years. Inside, there were separate rooms, sometimes bathrooms, and chutes for waste disposal. It's the kind of sensible housing design you might wish your landlord would consider. The Harappans clearly believed in comfort and practicality for ordinary families, not just the elites. Now here's the really curious part. In all this urban planning, these neat streets, these clever drains, these carefully constructed houses, we find no obvious palaces or temples. Unlike Egypt, where monuments scream about pharaohs, or Mesopotamia, where ziggurats dominate the skyline, Harappan cities seem almost democratic in their architecture. This leaves us with a mystery. Who was in charge? Someone had to coordinate the production of millions of bricks, the layout of streets, the building of baths. Was there a council of elders, a priestly class, a hidden bureaucracy writing memos on clay tablets? We don't know. What we do know is that the organization was there, but it wasn't shouting about itself in stone. So what was it like to live in one of these cities? Picture the morning. Farmers leading cattle through the streets, merchants arranging pottery and beads in the marketplace, children playing with clay toys shaped like carts and animals, women grinding grain, men at work in workshops carving seals, and the smell of fresh bread rising from clay ovens. The hum of urban life was everywhere, yet beneath it all was a sense of order, the streets guiding traffic, the drains carrying away waste, the wells providing water. It must have felt like living in a society that cared deeply about function and harmony, even if we don't know exactly who gave the orders. Archaeologists often shake their heads in wonder at how advanced the Indus Valley cities were. The urban planning, the standardized measurements, the water management, all of it places them among the most sophisticated societies of their age. In some ways, they were ahead of their time. And yet they weren't flashy about it. They didn't leave pyramids or colossal statues. Instead, they left something subtler, the legacy of well-ordered cities where ordinary life was made just a little easier. A civilization that believed, it seems, in the quiet dignity of everyday living. If the cities of the Indus Valley dazzled with their neat grids and clever drains, the real heart of the civilization lay in the daily lives of the people who filled those streets. Behind every line of bricks and every carefully laid street were families who cooked, farmed, traded, bathed, and occasionally argued about whose turn it was to grind the wheat. Civilizations, after all, aren't built on monuments alone. They are built on breakfast, laughter, and the steady rhythm of ordinary days. Food was the foundation of it all. The fertile plains gave them wheat, barley, lentils, peas, sesame, and even rice in the later years. Cotton fields waved in the breeze, not to fill stomachs but to clothe bodies. In the kitchens of Mohenjo-Daro, flatbread sizzled on clay hearths, lentils boiled slowly in pots, and milk was poured from clay jars. It's not hard to picture a family gathered around their evening meal, children sneaking an extra bite of chickpeas while their parents pretended not to notice. Meat was on the table too, though probably less often. Cows gave milk, chickens offered eggs, sheep and goats provided both wool and food. Fish from the river added variety to the diet. A Harappan pantry was not only practical but surprisingly familiar, close enough to modern vegetarian cooking to make you smile at the continuity. What they wore was equally practical but with a dash of elegance. Cotton, that soft miracle of fabric, was their everyday material. Men probably wrapped themselves in simple cloths around the waist, while women draped themselves in longer pieces that may have resembled early versions of a sari. Yet it was jewelry that gave their fashion real sparkle. Beads of carnelian, agate, and shell, bangles carved from conch, and necklaces strung with tiny polished stones. These were treasures found in workshops across the valley. A Harappan woman stepping out with her hair tied in a neat bun, and her arms jingling with bangles must have felt just as stylish as anyone posting a selfie today. Their work filled the cities with sound and purpose. Farmers tilled the soil beyond the city walls, coaxing crops from the fertile earth. Potters shaped red and black vessels on spinning wheels, their hands steady with generations of practice. Metalworkers hammered copper into tools and ornaments. Weavers twisted cotton threads into cloth. And then there were the bead makers, patient and precise, polishing stones into glittering tokens of beauty. Merchants bustled through the markets with carts creaking under their loads, weighing out grain and beads with standardized stone cubes that spoke of a culture that valued fairness. It must have been noisy and lively, markets filled with the scent of baked bread, the cries of traders, the lowing of oxen, and the playful shrieks of children darting between stalls. But they knew how to play too. Archaeologists have uncovered little clay carts with wheels, tiny animal figurines, and rattles that would have delighted children. Dice made of stone hint at board games, at groups of friends or families sitting cross-legged in courtyards, laughing as they rolled the cubes and claimed victory. Even 4,000 years ago, it seems, people couldn't resist the thrill of chance. Life revolved around family and community. Homes, though not enormous, were practical and comfortable, often 2 stories tall with flat roofs and courtyards. Wells stood nearby, so water was never far away. Bathing was not just for hygiene, but perhaps also for ritual, making Harappans some of the cleanest people of the ancient world. Extended families may have shared the same household, grandparents watching children play in the courtyard, while parents worked the fields or shops. In the evenings, neighbors probably gathered at their doorsteps, chatting about the harvest, the weather, and perhaps even the latest shipment of beads from some faraway trader. Religion lingered quietly in the background of these routines. Terracotta figurines shaped like women with wide hips suggest a reverence for fertility. Seals carved with horned figures and animals may point toward early deities, the faint ancestors of Hindu gods. And the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, with its carefully sealed bricks and stairways leading down into still water, whispers of ceremonies that once echoed within its walls. Whether it was for ritual purification or simple social gatherings, it gave the city a heartbeat that was both spiritual and communal. So if you close your eyes and picture a day in Mohenjo-Daro, you can see it clearly. The sun rises over brick rooftops. A woman grinds grain, her hands moving with steady rhythm. A man leads his oxen out to the fields, while his child plays with a toy cart at the doorway. The streets fill with merchants. The air hums with bargaining, children laugh as they roll dice, and smoke curls upward from clay ovens as families prepare their meals. And when the day fades, people return to their homes, the city settling into quiet as lamps flicker in the windows and the great bath glimmers faintly in the moonlight. In these small moments, the Harappans step out from the ruins and remind us that even across 4,000 years, daily life is built on the same simple joys: work, play, love, and community. The Indus Valley people were not only masters of their cities and daily routines, they were also quietly remarkable traders, thinkers, and record keepers, even if their writings remain a mystery to us. Imagine standing at a bustling riverside dock in Lothal, one of their important trade hubs, watching boats with neatly stacked cargo drifting in from faraway lands. The air carries the mingled scent of river water, baked clay, and fresh fish, while merchants shout over the gentle lapping of waves, bargaining for copper, carnelian beads, and finely woven cotton. This was not a small-scale market. It was an intricate network of commerce stretching from the Indus Plains to Mesopotamia and beyond. Harappans were meticulous about trade. They developed standardized weights and measures, tiny cubical stones carefully carved to ensure fairness. Imagine a trader from Mohenjo-Daro trying to sell a necklace of carnelian beads to a merchant from Ur in Mesopotamia. The weight had to be precise, the standards consistent, or someone might accuse them of cheating. That level of organization reflects a sophisticated economy where trust was maintained not just by social ties but through clever systems of measurement. Merchants carried their goods over long distances, sometimes hundreds of miles, using rivers, carts, and pack animals. They traded gold, silver, semi-precious stones, pottery, and textiles, some of which have been found far from the Indus, hinting at a network more complex than we might imagine for a civilization that existed 4,000 years ago. But trade wasn't just about goods. It was also about communication, which brings us to one of the greatest puzzles of the Indus Valley, their writing system. Thousands of small seals have been discovered, each carved with intricate symbols, often accompanied by depictions of animals, unicorns, bulls, elephants, and mysterious horned figures. The inscriptions are usually short, only a few symbols long, and so far, no one has been able to decipher them. Scholars have tried tirelessly. Hopping these symbols might reveal the names of rulers, details of trade agreements, or perhaps even love poems, but the Indus script remains an unsolved code. This mystery makes the civilization all the more intriguing. Every seal is a tiny whisper from the past, a hint at thoughts, transactions, and stories that will never fully reach us. It's tempting to imagine what they might have said. Perhaps a merchant inscribed a seal. To whom it may concern, these beads are of the finest quality, polished under the moonlight and blessed by the river goddess. Or maybe it was a mundane note. Do not touch my goat. Whatever the truth, the inscriptions suggest a people who care deeply about documentation and communication. Even without fully understanding their script, we can infer a lot from the objects and symbols they left behind. For example, seals were likely used to stamp clay on goods, functioning as both signature and brand. Traders and officials would carry these tiny engraved squares everywhere, pressing them into clay tags to mark ownership or origin. In a way, it was an ancient form of quality control, a Harappan version of certified authentic long before such terms existed. The sophistication of their trade networks also hints at a remarkable level of social organization. Cities had to coordinate production, storage, and shipment of goods. Farmers and artisans supplied materials, while merchants ensured that products traveled to distant lands. All of this required planning, communication, and trust, even without kings sending decrees from towering palaces. The Harappans managed it quietly, efficiently, and without leaving dramatic monuments that shout, "Look how great we are." And then there is the geography itself, which both enabled and challenged their trade. The Indus River and its tributaries acted like ancient highways, carrying goods and ideas across vast distances. But rivers change, shift, and flood. Navigating these waterways required skill, knowledge, and cooperation. Harappan boats, though simple by today's standards, were sturdy enough to carry cargo, and docks like the one in Lothal show that they knew how to manage loading and unloading with precision. It's hard not to admire their ingenuity. Yet despite all this trade and documentation, a sense of mystery surrounds their written language. Some scholars argue it might not even be a language as we understand it. It could have been a system of symbols for trade, religious markers, or clan insignias. Without a Rosetta Stone equivalent, we can only guess. Each seal, each engraving, is a riddle left for us millennia later, a puzzle we may never fully solve. There is a quiet beauty in that ambiguity. The Indus script reminds us that civilizations can flourish and organize their lives in sophisticated ways without leaving behind easily readable records or grandiose monuments. Their legacy is not shouted from stone. It whispers from clay, bricks, and beads. It invites us to imagine the lives of traders, artisans, and ordinary people, piecing together the past from fragments and faint impressions. Perhaps that is the most remarkable thing of all. The Indus Valley Civilization thrived for centuries, conducted far-reaching trade, and built complex urban centers, all without the need for towering temples, colossal statues, or the kind of propaganda monuments we often associate with ancient empires. They demonstrate that sophistication and ingenuity do not always require flamboyance. Sometimes they manifest in subtle order, quiet efficiency, and carefully carved seals that have survived 4,000 years. And so, as we step back from the bustling markets, the carved seals, and the mysterious symbols, we are left with a sense of wonder and curiosity. The Indus Valley people lived, traded, communicated, and thrived, leaving behind clues that tease our imagination and encourage careful listening to the whispers of history. Their story reminds us that even without reading their words, we can feel the pulse of a civilization that was orderly, inventive, and quietly extraordinary. Life in the Indus Valley was not only practical and orderly, but also rich with subtle culture and expressions of belief. Even without towering temples or grand statues, the Harappans cultivated a quiet spirituality that seems to have touched nearly every part of their daily existence. Their reverence for certain objects, animals, and symbols shows that ritual and art were woven seamlessly into life, creating a civilization that was as thoughtful as it was organized. Take, for example, the ubiquitous terracotta figurines found throughout Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and other settlements. Many depict women with pronounced features, often thought to represent fertility goddesses. Some scholars speculate that these figures were carried as charms or placed in homes to bless the household with prosperity and children. Whether the figurines were sacred or decorative, they hint at a culture that valued continuity, family, and the cycles of life. It's tempting to imagine a mother handing a small clay figurine to her child, whispering a story about the river goddess or the fertility of the land, bridging the spiritual and the everyday with a gentle touch. Animals also held symbolic significance. Seals carved with unicorn-like creatures, elephants, bulls, and horned figures have been discovered in great numbers. While the exact meaning of these symbols remains a mystery, it's clear that certain animals were revered or associated with specific aspects of life. Perhaps a bull represented strength, a unicorn power, or an elephant wisdom, though the truth may be lost forever. Nevertheless, these images were carefully crafted, suggesting that art was never purely decorative. Every seal, every figurine carried meaning, whether for trade, ritual, or social identity. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro exemplifies the Harappans' sophisticated approach to ritual and communal life. Unlike the private baths of homes, this public pool was grand in scale, lined with precisely fitted bricks and equipped with a drainage system that could fill and empty the pool efficiently. Was it for religious purification, for social gatherings, perhaps a bit of both? The very presence of such a structure reflects a community that took ritual seriously, blending practicality with spiritual intention. Imagine the cool water glistening in the morning sun, citizens moving quietly around the pool, performing ceremonies that reinforced social cohesion and cultural identity. Art in the Indus Valley was also playful and human-centered. Small toys, such as clay carts and animal figurines, show that the Harappans had an eye for both function and amusement. Even their pottery was decorated with elegant motifs, geometric patterns, plant shapes, and simple animals. There is a subtle sophistication in these designs, a quiet charm that balances utility with aesthetic appeal. Everyday objects were elevated into art, revealing a culture that found beauty in ordinary life. We can also see the Harappans' attention to balance and symmetry in their urban design, which in itself reflects cultural values. Streets, homes, and public buildings were aligned thoughtfully, suggesting an appreciation for harmony that extended beyond utility into an almost artistic philosophy. Life was organized, yes, but it was organized with an eye for proportion, balance, and quiet elegance. Walking through Mohenjo-Daro, one can almost sense that the people who lived there cared as much about beauty as they did about order. Clothing and adornment were also part of cultural expression. Beads of carnelian, bracelets of shell, and simple necklaces show that personal appearance mattered. Hair was styled with care, women wearing buns, sometimes decorated with ornaments, men keeping neatly trimmed beards. Even in a society focused on practicality, there was room for individual expression and social signaling. Imagine strolling through a marketplace, the sun catching on polished beads and jewelry, while children darted through the streets carrying clay toys. Life was practical, orderly, but never devoid of charm or artistry. Religion and art seemed intertwined in subtle ways. The recurring motifs on seals, horned animals, birds, and geometric patterns suggest ritualistic significance. While we cannot read their inscriptions, the symbols imply belief systems that connected humans, animals, and the natural world. Perhaps these motifs marked ownership, spiritual protection, or even cosmic harmony. Each artifact is a whisper of thought, a trace of imagination, or a hint of devotion that reaches across millennia. Even leisure had a ritual quality. The toys and games of children, small though they might be, likely reinforced social learning, family bonds, and the rhythms of daily life. Dice games and spinning tops were more than entertainment. They were a form of shared culture, teaching strategy, patience, and cooperation. In this way, the Indus Valley Civilization blurred the line between work, play, and belief, making every day a tapestry of practical activity, artistic expression, and quiet ritual. Perhaps the most poignant evidence of their cultural sophistication is the careful thought they put into communal spaces. Public wells, baths, and granaries weren't merely functional. They were designed to serve communities in ways that were socially and spiritually meaningful. A well, for example, provided water but also a place where neighbors gathered, shared news, and reinforced social cohesion. A granary safeguarded the harvest but also symbolized collective prosperity. Their urban planning, their art, and their rituals all speak of a culture that thought carefully about the connections between people, nature, and the divine. In many ways, the Harappans offer a lesson for today. They show that a civilization does not need ostentatious monuments or endless proclamations to be great. Sophistication can manifest in the way streets are laid out, in the thoughtful construction of homes, in the crafting of small but meaningful art, and in the subtle integration of ritual into everyday life. Their legacy is not in grandeur, but in the quiet dignity of ordinary human experience elevated by care, thoughtfulness, and artistry. And so, as we imagine the sun setting over Mohenjo-Daro, casting a warm glow over brick streets and clay rooftops, it is easy to picture families finishing their day. Children place their toys carefully in the courtyard, women and men adjust their jewelry or clothing, and perhaps someone carries a small terracotta figurine as a token of luck or devotion. Life continued with rhythm, balance, and meaning, an elegant harmony of practical and spiritual pursuits. Even without reading a single word of their undeciphered script, we can feel the humanity, the artistry, and the quiet grace of the Indus Valley Civilization. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization does not end with the neatly laid streets of Mohenjo-Daro or the carefully stacked granaries of Harappa. Like all great civilizations, it experienced a gradual transformation, a fading away that leaves us with questions more than answers. Around 1900 BCE, the flourishing cities of the Indus began to show signs of decline, though the exact reasons remain elusive, wrapped in the same mystery that surrounds their undeciphered script. Imagine walking through the streets and noticing, little by little, that some houses were abandoned, workshops grew silent, and markets lost their constant hum. Life didn't stop abruptly, it slowly dwindled, like the last embers of a fire before darkness. Scholars have debated for decades about what caused this slow unraveling. One prevailing theory points to climate change. Evidence from sediment and river patterns suggests that the mighty Indus River, which had been a lifeline, may have shifted course or flooded unpredictably. A river that once carried water to the fields and boats to the docks could have become unreliable, forcing people to reconsider where and how they lived. Fields that had yielded wheat and barley for centuries might have become less fertile, compelling communities to move, fragment, or adapt in ways that left the urban centers quieter and emptier. Another compelling theory involves drought and resource stress. Archaeological studies show that groundwater levels may have dropped, and wells once reliable could have dried up. In a civilization so dependent on water for daily life, irrigation, and bathing, even a small drop could cascade into larger social consequences. Picture families standing by empty wells, merchants struggling to ship goods without reliable river access, and farmers watching crops wither under relentless sun. The harmony and order of centuries could be challenged by something as simple as water scarcity. Some researchers speculate that shifts in trade networks played a role. The Indus Valley Civilization had thrived on commerce, trading with distant lands like Mesopotamia, exchanging beads, metals, and textiles. But as new powers rose elsewhere or maritime routes shifted, the flow of goods and wealth may have slowed. Harappan cities, dependent on these networks, could have gradually lost the economic vitality that sustained their urban life. Markets would have quieted, workshops emptied, and artisans found fewer buyers for their finely crafted goods. The very network that once connected the Indus people to a larger world may have frayed. Then there is the tantalizing idea of social change or internal upheaval. While there's little evidence of violent conquest or invasion, subtle shifts in governance, population pressure, or social cohesion might have undermined the tightly organized cities. The egalitarian planning and careful urban coordination that had defined the civilization may have become harder to maintain as people migrated or focused on survival. Streets once bustling with children and merchants could have grown quiet, while wells and baths fell into disuse. Life, orderly for millennia, may have lost the rhythm that had made it so remarkable. Yet despite the decline, the civilization left a legacy that continues to speak across millennia. Even in its fading, the Indus Valley Civilization offers lessons in urban planning, social organization, artistry, and subtlety. They remind us that sophistication doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Bricks laid carefully 4,000 years ago still line the streets, wells still mark the courtyards, and the faint gleam of polished beads and terracotta figurines carries the echo of human life that once thrived in harmony with its environment. What strikes the modern observer most profoundly is how ordinary this civilization felt, even in its grandeur. Its people cooked meals, played games, raised children, traded goods, decorated themselves with beads, and perhaps paused each day to reflect on spiritual matters. They were, in essence, people much like us, concerned with family, community, and making life orderly and meaningful. Their decline was not a dramatic collapse in a single night. It was a slow, quiet fading, almost imperceptible, leaving behind structures, objects, and whispers of a culture that was once vibrant and alive. There's something poetic about that quiet disappearance. Unlike civilizations that crumble under conquest or burn in flames of war, the Indus Valley faded gently, leaving behind clues for the patient observer. Archaeologists digging in the 20th and 21st centuries uncover bricks, seals, toys, and drains, piecing together lives lived long ago. And every artifact reminds us that the people who inhabited these cities were thoughtful, skilled, and deeply human. They remind us that civilization is not only about kings or conquests, but about the everyday lives that persist and shape the world. Even today, standing at the site of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, one can almost feel the rhythm of daily life. Imagine the soft murmur of conversation in courtyards, children laughing with clay toys, merchants haggling over beads, artisans polishing carnelian stones. And then gradually the streets quiet. The river shifts. The workshops grow silent. Life moves elsewhere, leaving the city to be claimed by time. Yet the echoes remain. The precision of their bricks, the beauty of their seals, the cleverness of their drainage, and the enduring mystery of their script all speak to a civilization that valued order, skill, and subtlety over showy grandeur. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson the Indus Valley Civilization offers, that the true measure of a culture is not always in monuments or trophies, but in the dignity and care with which people live their everyday lives. In streets laid in perfect grids, in baths lined with bricks, in homes with wells and courtyards, in toys and figurines, and in the tiny seals that remain undeciphered, we can see a civilization that celebrated the ordinary and elevated it to something remarkable. So as we close this chapter of history, let us leave the Indus Valley as it must have appeared in its quiet twilight. The sun sets over Mohenjo-Daro, casting long shadows across empty streets. The river flows steadily, indifferent to the passage of time, while the great bath glimmers faintly in the evening light. Children's laughter is a memory carried on the breeze, merchants' voices fade, and homes stand as silent witnesses. The civilization has moved on, yet its story remains, patiently waiting for anyone willing to listen to the whispers of bricks, beads, and ancient clay. And in that quiet reflection, perhaps we can imagine ourselves walking those streets one last time, feeling the harmony, ingenuity, and humanity that the Harappans cultivated over millennia. For even as their cities faded, their legacy persists, a testament to a people who lived thoughtfully, worked diligently, and left behind a civilization that continues to inspire wonder and quiet admiration today.